Okay, first of all, this is Bruchim Haba, welcome everybody. We're here at the site of the Panovich Yeshiva. The Panovich Rav, in all of his incredible efforts to rebuild Torah, was always motivated because he knew that in Panovich there were institutions of over 1,000 children. You had, between this yeshiva, the Beis Yaakov, and the various institutions, it serviced over 1,000 people. And the Panovich Rav's dream was to rebuild Jewish life the way it was here in Panovich. Just to give you a little bit of insight into the attitude of the Panovich Rav and to his thought process in building Torah, I'm going to tell you a little anecdote, and not until today did I discover the rationale behind it. One time, there's a story Rabbi Wein likes to tell over, that when the Panovich Rav once visited Miami Beach, he asked Rabbi Wein to host a parlor meeting for young couples under 40. So Rabbi Wein, sort of said, this is a bad idea. Young couples under 40, they don't have money, they're busy with their kids, they're not financially stable. You have the wrong clientele to raise money for yeshivas. Panovich Rav told him, just do what I say. Okay, so they organized about 20 young couples. Panovich Rav said, I'm not raising money. I'm not here to ask to solicit, but I'm asking you one thing. 1.5 million Jewish children were killed in the Holocaust. Their bodies have been destroyed. Their souls are floating in the heavens. These souls need bodies to house them. Do me a favor, the Panovich Rav says. Could you please give the Jewish people some bodies for these souls to rest in? This was the drush the Panovich Rav gave to these young couples. And Rabbi Wein likes to say, a year later he told the Panovich Rav a bumper crop was born to the shul. The Panovich Rav actually developed this attitude from a Gemara in Avodah Zarah. The Gemara says that when they took out Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion to be killed, so they wrapped up his body in wet sponges and they burnt him. And they burnt him with the Sefer Torah. They took the Sefer Torah, they wrapped it around Rabbi Chanina ben Tradion, and they asked him, Rebbe, what do you see? What do you see? He says, I see ois parchais. I see the letters flying up to the heaven, ugvila nisrafim, but I see the parchment being burned. So the way the Panovich Rav understood that Gemara is that whenever you have sanctity, the core of the sanctity can never be destroyed. The letters fly up to heaven, but the parchment is consumed. In all the efforts of the Panovich Rav, he saw that after the Holocaust, the 6 million Jews were still floating in the heavens. All the yeshivas were still floating in the heavens. Anything that could be accomplished for the Jewish people still existed. And all we need is a few dedicated Jews to rebuild Torah so that these 6 million could come back to this world, so that the yeshivas could come back to this world, so that the institutions of Torah could be rebuilt. That's how the Panovich Rav saw the destruction of Churban Europa. So even though this yeshiva is not an active yeshiva, but so to speak, the soul of the yeshiva was floating in the air, and the Panovich Rav himself came and he rebuilt the yeshiva, and the neshama of the yeshiva came back to this world. This is where the yeshiva stood. Actually, in 1924, the Panovich Rav started, nowadays it's very popular. You have like learning movements for young married guys. Panovich Rav started a movement called Tiferes Bachurim. And they started with a few young married guys, and then ultimately it built up till 75 young married guys, and they made their own shul, and they got a hold of a Sefer Torah. And they had a Hachnasa Sefer Torah. And at this Hachnasa Sefer Torah, the Panovich Rav spoke, and he said, we just heard word in Romania, there's a pogrom, and they persecuted Jews, and they burned Sifrei Torah. But the way the Jewish world works is that if in one place they're burning a Sefer Torah, in another place, like here in Panovich, there's a Hachnasa Sefer Torah. That also was the worldview of the Panovich Rav. In Panovich, they were destroying the Jewish people. Do you know how many Rabbanim survived Panovich in the Holocaust? How many? 100? 50? 20? 10? None! There was not one Lithuanian Rav who survived Panovich, except for the Panovich Rav who was in South Africa at the time when the Nazis came. But the way the Panovich Rav saw it is that if they're burning a Sefer Torah in one place, they're rebuilding it somewhere else. If they're destroying Torah in Panovich, Torah could be rebuilt in Bnei Brak. I'll just conclude. Everybody is familiar. There's a famous account that as Rommel is primed, he's at the border of Egypt. He's going to take over the Suez Canal. He's going to run over the state of Palestine in a few days. Panovich Rav bought the plot of land to rebuild the Panovich Yeshiva in Bnei Brak. I think many are familiar with that. I didn't realize that Rabbi Tzalo Zolti asked the Panovich Rav, this is not a good business move. This is not the best time to purchase real estate. Panovich Rav says we're obligated to. We learn it from the Psukim in the Navi Yirmiyah. In Yirmiyah Perek Lamed Beis, we read about how Yirmiyah was foretold about the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash and that the Jewish people would be destroyed in the land of Israel. And in that Perek, Hashem tells Yirmiyah that when your uncle Hanamel comes and offers you a piece of land, you need to buy the land. Says the Panovich Rav, you know, there are more than just 24 Nevi'im in our history. So the Gemara says there are 1.2 million Nevi'im throughout history. But only the Nevuah that is meant to learn out for all generations is recorded in the Navi. So that means if the Navi Yirmiyah says you need to buy land at a time of destruction, that wasn't a one-time advice. That is advice l'doros. That when things seem bleak, that's when you need to buy real estate to rebuild Torah. That was a little bit of the life and the legacy of the Panovich Yeshiva. So as this yeshiva was destroyed, its soul went up to heaven, and through the efforts of the Panovich Rav, it was able to get a gevil in a new location in Eretz Yisrael, in Bnei Brak. It was oisios, parchos, ugvilin, nisrafim. Okay, here's another angle of the Panovich Yeshiva. After the Shiva for the Panovich Rav, it's printed in the Sefer Zichron Shmuel. Zichron Shmuel are the Zichronos of Chidushim of Reb Shmuel Rozovsky, who is Rosh Shiva Panovich. And he was maspid the Panovich Rav both when he passed away and after the Shiva. So after the Shiva, Rosh Shmuel Rozovsky said all of the Herculean efforts of the Panovich Rav were motivated because, as we mentioned, he was the sole Lithuanian survivor of all Panovich rabbinate, and he always said to himself, I saved myself, but I didn't save the ship. Hitzalti es atzmi, v'lo hitzalti es hasfina. He had a certain, maybe guilt, that he himself was rescued because he wasn't in town when the Nazis came, but he was not able to save his ship. But Reb Shmuel Rozovsky was the one who also said, this idea that the Panovich Rav viewed the world, that the soul of everything is floating in the air and we just need to provide the bodies, and it's rooted in the Gemara and Avodah Zarah, that the Reb Shmuel Rozovsky said at the hesped of the Panovich Rav. It's interesting, Panovich Rav was a master fundraiser. You know, they say, how do we know there's no life on Mars? Because if there was life on Mars, the Panovich Rav would have went there to collect. So one time, the yeshiva was in a desperate situation, and a friend of his made a certain connection. And the Panovich Rav was in the middle of giving shiur, and he gets word from the secretary, a certain gevir is here to see him. And now, if a gevir comes to see you, you go to see them, you know. Usually they're not available at a different time. That's usually how it works. But Panovich Rav was torn, you know, he's in the middle of giving shiur. And there were some eminent Talmidim in the shiur that could have taken over, Shmuel Rozovsky, Reb David Povarsky. But on the other hand, how's it going to look? He's giving up the shiur to get a few extra bucks. So he made the executive decision that he's not going to stop the shiur, hoping the gevir would still be available to donate to the yeshiva when the shiur was over. And it was a good move. Ultimately, this individual still contributed to the yeshiva. But Panovich Rav had a very unique view on the yeshiva's responsibility to those who he was fundraising from. Actually, on another occasion, there was a certain stingy guy in Miami who Panovich Rav could never get a buck from. You know, you have certain wealthy people, they want to schmooze with you. And it didn't dawn on them that the rabbi didn't come to get their opinion on the world and politics and to talk. The rabbi had a different agenda, but there was a certain gavir, he would schmooze with the Panovich Rav, and Panovich Rav could not get a penny out of him. One time, Panovich Rav just went in there, he stormed over to the guy, and he said, "You're going to write me out a check right now for $5,000, you're going to endow a class in the yeshiva." And the guy, was frozen, he didn't know what to do with him. He wrote out the check, he gave it to Panovich Rav. So they asked the Panovich Rav, you're usually so genteel, you're usually so courteous. This is not something you typically do. You demand a donation. Panovich Rav says, you have to understand, my Rebbe was a Chafetz Chaim. On many occasions, I discussed different matters with him, which yeshiva I should become Rosh Yeshiva on, which yeshivas I shouldn't become Rosh Yeshiva. And one time, after World War I, the Chafetz Chaim was in a shul. The Chafetz Chaim was coming to the shul, at midnight, and there was a gavir who came into the shul, was sleeping on the bench in the shul, and he told the Chafetz Chaim, "I have tinus on you." Chafetz Chaim, what do you mean? What do you have tinus on me? Well, one thing's for sure, I didn't say lashon hara about you. Why do you have tinus on me? And the man said, you once collected for the Radin Yeshiva from me, and I told you it wasn't a good time. I told you I didn't have the money at the time. You should have ripped the money out of my hand, because look at me now. I don't have any money, and I don't have the zechus for having supported the Radin Yeshiva. I have tinus on you that you let me get off so easy. Panovich Rav said, from there I learned that when you collect money from people for yeshivas, you're doing them a favor. And if they don't want to give it to you, you have to make sure they give it to you. They're not doing you a favor, you're doing them a favor. On another occasion, basically there was a man who supported the yeshiva, but he had a terminal illness, so he bought an annuity, and he figured the annuity would pay his needs for a couple of years, and then he would pass on. But the man lived and he lived and he lived. He lived till 90 years old. And I don't know, at age 85, the man went broke. So the Panovich Rav went to the man. He said, "I'm not here to collect money, but the same way donors show kindness to the yeshiva has to show kindness to the donors. From now on, whatever this annuity was going to pay you, the yeshiva will be paying your needs, and you need to live the same lifestyle you always lived. We'll be paying you until you need it, until Ad Mea V'Esrim." And sure enough, the yeshiva paid this man for a number of years, and after this man passed away, he left his home to the Panovich Yeshiva. So, the Panovich Yeshiva was a revolutionary thinker in terms of how he understood Jews, how he appreciated Jews, and how he approached Hachzakas HaTorah. Okay. Shalom Aleichem. Okay, we were in Panovich, so to get a little bit of a background about the city and the Panovich Rav, as mentioned, Panovich Rav learned in Radin by the Chafetz Chaim. Rabbi Rosen also mentioned his shver learned in Radin. The Panovich Rav was chavrusas with Rabbi Chanan. They learned together by chavrusa. Actually, there's an amazing story that the Panovich Rav was learning with Rabbi Chanan. They came across a certain achroin, and they didn't have access to the Sefer. They figured the Chafetz Chaim must have access to the Sefer. He quotes it all the time in the Mishnah Berurah. So they went to the Chafetz Chaim, "Rebbe, could we borrow the Sefer?" Chafetz Chaim says, "I don't have that Sefer. Why would you think I have that Sefer?" They said, "Rebbe, you quoted in the Mishnah Berurah." He says, "Chaval on all the Svarim that I quote in the Mishnah Berurah that I own." Most people say Chaval on Svarim they don't own. Chafetz Chaim says, "I say Chaval on the Svarim I do own." Why? For me to own a Sefer, I have to pay money. For me to get money, I have to go to work. For me to go to work, I have to give up time from learning. So I should give up time for learning to have a Sefer on my shelf. Better to have Svarim in my head than Svarim on my shelf, the Chafetz Chaim says. Chaval on the Svarim that I do own. Anyway, that was the story the Panovich Rav would say over, just to get a glimpse of the eminence of the Panovich Rav. Before the war already, he was a Rav in Panovich for 21 years, and he had been offered many prestigious rabbinic positions. He was offered to be the chief rabbi of Germany. He was offered to be the Rav in Dvinsk, in Grodno, in Frankfurt, and to everyone he said the same thing. His heart is with the people of Panovich. A little bit of the history of Panovich Jewry. Aside from Vilna, in the Kovna district, aside from Kovna itself, Panovich was the biggest Jewish city. There were more than 13,000 people. More than half of the 13,000 people were Jewish. In the main part of the town, everyone was Jewish. All the businesses were owned by the Jews. You could imagine if all the businesses were owned by the Jews, the city basically was quiet on Shabbos. The community, as all good Litvaks, could say the sh sound. So they ate fists on Shabbos, and they didn't wash, they vast. They went to vas, as they do in South Africa. Okay, the community of Panovich was renowned for their chesed. So there were many chevros of chesed. You had chevros soimech noiflim, to give free loans to the poor. Chevras linas hatzedek was the general tzedakah collection. You had chevra hachnasas orchim, chevra kadisha, and there were 10 shuls in Panovich. Different laborers belonged to different shuls. So if you were a shoemaker, you went to the shoemaker shul. If you were a fisherman, you went to the fisherman's shul, the butcher shul. In Kloisenberg, in Panovich, you could not be late to davening, because whenever the minyan was over, a new one was starting. There was another Klois, and I'll end with this. Panovich was renowned for its pure and delicious water. So in the middle of the courtyard of the shul, there was the pump, and they would carry the water in big barrels, and they sold the water by the bucket. But we know Ein Mayim Ela Torah, so if Panovich was renowned for their pure and clear water, it was also renowned as a center of Torah and an Ir Ve'im B'Yisrael. And as we mentioned, even though it's a city that was utterly destroyed, but Gvilim Nisrafim V'Oisi Ois Parchais, and they found new Gvilim in the Panovich Yeshiva that was founded by the Panovich Rav in Bnei Brak. Good morning, everyone. Shalom Aleichem. Welcome to Vilna. Vilna was called the Yerushalayim of Lita, but we need to contrast. We mentioned from the Ar Sameach that the downfall of the Jewish people is when they called Berlin Jerusalem, and yet Vilna was called the Yerushalayim of Lita. So it depends what your focus is. If Berlin is the Yerushalayim because you're escaping Yerushalayim, that's the beginning of the downfall. But if Vilna is Yerushalayim because it's a center of scholarship in Klal Yisrael, so that's connecting to Yerushalayim. One of the great sages who lived here in Vilna was Rav Avram Danzig, who was a close confidant of the Vilna Gaon and was also the mechutin of the Vilna Gaon. He wrote the Chaye Adam, and he wrote an amazing commentary on Aleinu L'Shabeach. If you don't know this, you don't know the simple meaning of Aleinu L'Shabeach. And Aleinu, which is one of the most important tefillos that we say 4 things. Shelo yasanu k'gaya aratzos, v'lo yisamanu k'mishchachos ha'adama, shelo yisam chalkeinu kahem, v'gayir aleinu k'chal ha'mainam. What are these 4 things we're thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for? Says the Chaye Adam, Shelo yasanu k'gaya aratzos, that Hashem gave us the Torah. V'lo yisamanu k'mishchachos ha'adama, Shalai Asanu Kagaya Aratzos, that Hashem made the Jewish soul different than the soul of the rest of the world. He made us differently than the nations of the world. Shalai Asanu Kagaya Aratzos. Our neshama is qualitatively different. V'lo Samanu K'mishpachos Adama. He gave Klal Yisrael the Torah. Shalai Sam Chalkeinu Kahem. Hashem gave Klal Yisrael Eretz Yisrael. And V'gayir Aleinu Kachal Hamainam. Our relationship with Hashem, the Hashgacha Pratis, without any intermediary malach, is different than all the nations of the world. These are the 4 primary distinctions between Klal Yisrael and the nations of the world, which are the essential theme of the final tefillah of davening, which the Mishnah Berurah brings tremendous nachas ruach to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He made our neshamas differently. He gave us the Torah. He gave us Eretz Yisrael. And the Hashgacha Pratis of Hashem dealing with Klal Yisrael without any intermediary malach. Have a beautiful day. We're here at the famous location of the Strashun Library. If you look in the back of Shas, you'll find the comments of the Rashash. The Rashash was his father, Reb Shlomo Strashun. The Rashash. He wrote notes on the entire Shas. There are only 8, not blat, 8 amudim in Shas that we don't have comments of the Rashash. His son, Reb Matisyahu, did not have children. However, he had the largest library here in Eastern Europe, known as the Strashun Library. There are many volumes. It's considered a prize if you could get your hands on a volume that has the stamp of Rabbi Matisyahu Strashun. In fact, in the back of Masechta Eruvin and Masechta Baba Basra, you have the footnotes of Rabbi Matisyahu Strashun, Matisyahu Strashun. So this is his library. He inherited all the volumes of his father, as well as amassed one of the great libraries in the world. So this is, we're headed over here. Okay. Okay, it's of great note to have a statue here of the water carrier of Vilna. Did you know that the water carrier of Vilna is responsible for many Sfarim? Mishnah Brura, Sefer Chafetz Chaim, Teiras Habayis, all the Sfarim of the Chafetz Chaim are because of the water carrier of Vilna. How so? You know, the Chafetz Chaim was a Yasaim. As a young man, he studied here in Vilna. Vilna, besides being Yushalayim Delita, was also the seat of the Maskilim. Many great Maskilim lived here in Vilna. The father of all the Maskilim of Eastern Europe was somebody by the name of Mordechai Aryeh Ginsburg. Perhaps the most wicked of all the Maskilim was Adam HaKohen. Adam HaKohen. Chafetz Chaim was learning in the Beis Medrash, and the Maskilim always had their sights on the most brilliant minds to try to trap them and bring them back to the seminary. They had their sights set on the Chafetz Chaim. And Adam HaKohen would come into the Beis Medrash and he would engage the Chafetz Chaim in conversation. In fact, he would speak to the Chafetz Chaim for hours and hours and hours. He even thought he had the Chafetz Chaim. A certain water carrier came over to the young Chafetz Chaim. He said, "Do you know who you're talking to? You're talking to Adam HaKohen. Adam HaKohen back in the seminary. He eats chazer treif. Don't even talk to him." And the Chafetz Chaim ran out of town. He left the town. And he would always say, thanks to the water carrier, he became the Chafetz Chaim. So, you know, the water carrier doesn't get his just dues, but at least we have a statue of him, and we could remember the contribution to the Vilna water carrier in continuing the tradition of Klal Yisrael with the Mishnah Brura and Sefer Chafetz Chaim. Okay, Bruchim Haba, and welcome everyone. We're in the Shul of Vilna, and you look at the ornate Aron Kodesh, and as Edward pointed out, this is not the typical style of an Ashkenazic shul. It is created in the image of the third Beis HaMikdash, which gives us the idea that a Beis HaKnesses is an actual Mikdash. Like the Rishonim teach us that when one comes to a shul, one is Mekayim the mitzvah d'oraisa of Umikdashai Tiro. You know, actually, there are certain kavanas a person should have when they enter a shul. First of all, when you go into a shul, whenever you go into a shul, you should have kavana to Mekayim the mitzvah d'oraisa of Umikdashi Tira'u. I want to share with you here, we're in Vilna, what the Vilna Gaon says, that Miyom Shacharav Beis HaMikdash, the Gemara tells us in Brachos, the day the temple was destroyed, Ein Lo LaHakadosh Baruch Hu, all God has is Daled Amos Shel Halacha Belvad, the 4 cubits of Halacha. What exactly are these 4 cubits of Halacha? Again, from the day the temple was destroyed, this Aron is in the image of the temple. From the day the temple was destroyed, all HaKadosh Baruch Hu has are the 4 cubits of halacha. What are the 4 cubits of halacha? Nobody occupies 4 cubits. 4 cubits is 8 feet by 8 feet. You have to be pretty large to occupy 4 cubits. What are the Dalet Amma Shel Halacha? Says the Vilna Gaon. If you look in the Gemara in Chagiga, the Gemara tells us about the vision of Zechariah. Zechariah saw a nevuah, a scroll, and on the scroll was written the entirety of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law. How big was this scroll? The pasuk says it was 20 amos by 20 amos, which means that a scroll that would occupy that could contain the entire Torah Sheba'al Peh. How big is it? It's 400 amos. That means 400 amos is needed to contain the whole Torah Sheba'al Peh. How many Siddharim were there of the Torah Sheba'al Peh? We know today we have 6 Siddharim of Torah Sheba'al Peh. But the Gemara tells us that before the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, there were 600 Siddharim of Torah Sheba'al Peh. So that means to contain 600 Siddharim of Torah Sheba'al Peh, you needed 400 amos. But nowadays we only have Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. So if 400 amos are needed to contain 600 Siddharim, then how big of a scroll do you need to contain 6 Siddharim? Says the Gemara, that's the meaning. Miyoim shechar beis hamikdash ein lo lahakadosh baruch hu ela daled amos shel halacha. Daled amos shel halacha is the scroll needed to contain Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. Based on the calculation, if 400 amos contains 600 Siddharim, then to contain 6 Siddharim, all you need is Daled amos. So this image of the Aron gives us the picture that a Beis HaMikdash is given to us, even in our days, in the miniature form of the Beis HaKnesses, the Beis HaMedrash. Okay, friends, we're here in Vilna at the National Lithuanian Library. This is the National Library of the entire Lithuania. So you say, we came here to go to Kvarim, not to see a library. You know that the Vilna Gaon, first of all, the Chida in all of his travels never made it to Eastern Europe. The Chida, though, traveled to all the great libraries of Western Europe. However, the Gra pravd galus, which means he went anonymously and he walked through the cities of Lithuania anonymously, people who didn't know who he was, but he made sure to travel to all the libraries. The Vilna Gaon traveled to all the libraries. The Gra, one of his great contributions is that he determined and he established the proper text of Talmud Bavli, Yushalmi, Sifra, Tosefta, Mechilta, and all the Torah Sheba'al Peh based on his seichel and also based on manuscripts that he saw in the various libraries. So if we're in Vilna and we're commemorating the life of the Vilna Gaon, we have to come here to the library. This was part of the avodah of the Vilna Gaon himself. Okay. To add on, this is a very important part about the Vilna Gaon. Somewhat ironic, but to have a true understanding of the Gra. On the one hand, the Gra studied all the disciplines. The Gra was a great philosopher. However, the Gra criticized even the Rambam. The Gra says that philosophy led the Rambam astray in certain areas. The Gra studied music. The Gra studied all mathematics. He wrote the Sefer Ayel Mashulash on trigonometry. And at the same time, even though the Gra encompassed all disciplines, the Gra was the guardian of the approach of only studying Torah. So for the Gra personally, he studied everything. But what he recommended to Klal Yisrael was the pure study of only Torah Seinu HaKadosha. Okay, we're here in the National Library in Lithuania, where they have a very impressive collection of books that are stamped and were owned by some of the all-time great giants. We're going to start with this volume. This volume is Mahari Korkus on the Rambam Hilchos Ram, which was owned by Rabbi Chanan Wasserman Baranovich. It even has his address. This is the personal stamp of Rabbi Chanan Wasserman. Throughout the book, his stamp appears numerous times. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, if you want to write a letter, he lives on 30 Herbiuaska Street. Okay, that was Rabbi Chanan's address. Also, we have the name of a family member, Naftali Wasserman. These 2 volumes were owned by the Rosh Shiva of Telz, Rabbi Meir Blach. Here you have one of his stamps in red, you have another stamp in purple. Ram B'Yeshiva HaKadosh de Telz, Rabbinus E.M. Blochas Telsai. This volume, this amazing volume, was given to the Rav of Vilna, the great Cheshek Shloimeh. So you have an inscription here, Mincha hi shlucha l'chvad yedidi harav hagan meforsam, Kesar HaTorah Shloimeh HaKoyen Tepai. And inside you have the stamp of Reb Shloimeh HaKoyen of Vilna's son, Rav Ram Yaakov ben Hagoyin Reb Shloimeh HaKoyen Vilna. Okay, we're moving on. This volume was given as a gift to Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector. Okay, imagine this was given to Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector from the Mechaber. Moreinu Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector, Meis HaMechaber, Berigshe Kavod Ha'av oisoi b'chol leiv, from the author of Hashchita v'Habedika. Okay, we are moving along to the personal library of the Panovich Harav. So this is just Oitzar from the Yeshiva Hagdolah, the Panovich. This was owned by the yeshiva, but this is the Panovich Harav's own personal volume of the Ramchal. You would not have expected the Panovich Harav to have a copy, not of the Sifrei Ramchal, and not specifically of this Sefer. This is Sefer Kinas Hashem Tzavakais, about learning Kabbalah. And also the Sefer Klach Pesachei Chachma, 138 rules of the Ramchal on the principles of Kabbalah. This is the personal volume of Kabbalah of the Panovich Harav. We also want to point out a Sefer given to Reb Chaim Oizer, Sefer Tzedakah Mishpat, given to Reb Chaim Oizer, L'maylas Kvod Rav Goin Ha'adar Mefursam Chaim Oizer Grozinski. Speaking about Reb Chaim Oizer, you have the volume of Chevra Mishnayos of all Jews in Vilna who agreed to learn Mishnah, and under the letter Ches you have the entry, the first entry on the letter Ches of Harav Hagoin Reb Chaim Oizer ben Reb David Shlomo Grozinski. He was a member of the Chevra Mishnayos. That means he committed himself to study the Mishnah. He committed himself to support anyone in the city who lost a relative, and the so to speak, the bylaws of being a member of this chevra are over here. You have 8 laws, and probably most interesting is, as we mentioned, we were outside the Strashun library. Here are 2 examples of volumes owned by the Strashun library with the seal of Ramat Yisrael Strashun. So after he passed away, they stamped it that this is part of his collection. Here in the library, they have over 1,000 volumes from the Strashun library. Choisam shel beis eked hasfarim lahagoin hamanoach Ramat Yisrael Strashun. Then, of course, if you're interested in Einstein's theory of relativity, this was the only book ever written, or at least in time in Lashon HaKodesh, about Einstein's theory of relativity, where you have a letter where it says that the chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Dr. Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog, read this book, and he says, Karasi as a sefer be'iyon haroi. He was ma'ayin into this book. V'ni oimei b'peh malei ki amnam harbe karasi me'ein zeh be'anglis. He said, I've read a lot of theory of relativity in English. I never saw such a wondrous composition. Aside from its clarity and its presentation, says Rav Herzog, it is extra beloved. Shu kasav bil shaynenu ha'ivris v'arehu ma'asher es sifrusenu. It enriches our literature to have a book in Lashon HaKodesh about Einstein's theory of relativity. And thank you very much for allowing us not only to read these volumes, but to take them all home back to our house in the 5 towns. We appreciate not the loan, we appreciate the gift. Thank you very much. And no. Thank you for your time. And if anybody wants to have a good read on the theory of relativity in Lashon HaKodesh, this is the volume to get. Okay, so we're here in Vilna. We're at the original seat of the Vilna printing press. This is where the Vilna Shas was printed. The Achim Ram had the room here where they printed many, many Sfarim. So I'll tell you something from the Vilna Gaon about Shas. You know, Chazal say that when it comes to Shas, Yehei libai gas bahem. Your heart should be frequent in it. You should know it well. You should be accustomed to it. Gas, 63. But the Gaon says, where does it come from that there are 36 Mesechtas, 63 Mesechtas? Where does that come from? 63 Mesechtas. So the Gaon says, if you count Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, Baba Bas as 3 different Mesechtas, then you have 65 Mesechtas. So the Gaon says actually there's 65 Mesechtas in Shas. Okay, 65. How many books are there in Tanakh? There are 24 books in Tanakh, but if you count the 2 Luchais, there are 26. 26 Sfarim of Tanakh, the Gra says. This was actually found in a manuscript of the Gra, the Moscow edition of the manuscript of the Gra. There are 26 components of Tar Shabachsav, 65 components of Tar Shabal Peh. The 26 components of Tar Shabachsav correspond to the Shem Havaya. The 65 components of the Tar Shabal Peh correspond to the Shem Adnos, Aleph, Daled, Nun, Yud. So you see you have 26 components of You're going to be on TorahAnytime.com. So go. No. Okay. It's good for his business. Okay. 26 components of Torah Shebechsav, 65 components on Torah Shebal Peh. Says the Vilna Gaon, Megillah Nikres. Ready for this remez? Megillah Nikres. The Megillah could be read. B'Yud Aleph, B'Yud Beis, B'Yud Gimel, B'Yud Daled, B'Tes Vav. Let's add that up. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. That's 65. Megillah Nikres. Meaning, Hashem's name in the Megillah is revealed with 65. The Shem Aleph Daled Nun Yud. Torah Shebal Peh. Lo Pachos V'lo Yoser. Not less. Less is 10. V'lo Yoser, not more, is 16. 10 and 16 is 26. The Shem Havaya. In other words, the Shem Havaya is not in Megillas Esther. The Shem Adnos is in Megillas Esther. Where is the Shem Adnos in Megillas Esther? Hamelach. Hamelach is the Shem Adnos. So this is based on the Gra's teaching that there are 65 Masechtas in Shas, but actually that's in the Mishnayos. Talmud Bavli in the Vilna Shas had how many volumes? Even though we have a tradition, Halichos Oilam Loi, 36 Masechtas in Shas, but not the Vilna Shas. Vilna Shas, 37 volumes, 37 Masechtas of the Vilna Shas. They were all published right over here, behind you in this building. Okay.
Let's go.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We were just at the seat of the Vilna Shas, the printing press, the Vilna printing press of the Ram brothers, the widow Ram and her sons, which is a good opportune time to talk about the great controversy in the printing of the Shas between the Vilna Shas and what was known as the Slavita Shas or the Shapiro Shas. The Shapiro printing press was founded in the Ukraine, in Slavita, by Rav Moshe Shapiro. Rav Moshe Shapiro was a student, was the son of Rav Pinchas Karatzer. And he had a major printing press. And when he printed the Shas in 1807, he wanted to get a haskama and also a copyright. So the Baal HaTanya himself signed on a copyright that nobody is allowed to compete with this Shas for 25 years. It was signed on many Rabbanim, and including the Baal HaTanya. In the 1830s, when the Vilna Shas wanted to print their Shas, which the Vilna Shas follows the pagentation of the Bamberg Shas, and the Vilna Shas said, look, the Man brothers said, look, the 25 years have passed, we should be able to publish our Shas. So Shapiro said, no, 25 years passed since I began printing my Shas in 1807, but since then I updated it, I revamped it, and the shot clock starts again. So 25 years have not passed since our final edition. This became a major controversy where Rabbi Akiva Eiger and Chassam Sofer took the sides of the Vilna Shas, but the Yeshuas Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Ornstein, he sided with Shapiro. Interestingly, one of the printers was fired from the Shapiro press. He was found dead. One of the printers who worked for Shapiro was found dead, and it seemed like he committed suicide. But the family of the deceased accused the printers of killing him. Ultimately, the Shapiro family was imprisoned. Many local priests and apostates were in general upset with Shapiro, so they joined in the accusations against Shapiro. And in 1856, the Shapiros moved their operation from Slavita and they moved it to Zhitomir. You'll see many svarim saying it published in Zhitomir. That's in the aftermath of this controversy. After the Shapiros were released from prison, they moved the printing press to Zhitomir. And by the way, in the Chassidish Welt, it's considered very desirable to procure a sefer from Zhitomir Press. What?
What country?
Also in Ukraine. And this is a little bit of the history. So this Vilna Shas had waited the requisite 25 years from 1807, but in the interim, the Slavita Shas had updated its version. So these are some early copyright cases. These are some early precedents in the halachos of copyright. Okay. We're here in Vilna at Uzhapish, the Uzhapish cemetery. In this area, there were 70,000 graves of Jews, but this whole area became a national park. No preservation whatsoever. Graves were all violated. Many of them have been gathered here. And after they killed us here in this area, and they wiped out all the Jews, so they put up a sign, please respect the matzevos. But this is a remnant of over 70,000 matzevos that lay here. We're going to go across the street. We're going to see the kever of Rabbi Baruch Ber, which was found 13 years ago, precisely, in this area. We're going to discuss why it was found here. What was Rabbi Baruch Ber doing here? Rabbi Baruch Ber did not live in Vilna. And but that's the one kever that remains in this cemetery. Okay, we're here on the outskirts of Vilna, in the Uzhapish cemetery, which we mentioned was completely desecrated. And we're at the kever of Rabbi Baruch Ber. Chadmin Kamaya. Now, first let's talk about what's Rabbi Baruch Ber doing here. You know, one time, a certain darshan gave a drasha, and he was talking about the importance of Torah. And he said, Torah is so important, it's like avir l'neshima, it's like air to breathe. He was highlighting the centrality of Torah to the life of a Jew. And Rabbi Baruch Ber, who is of gentle spirit, Rabbi Baruch Ber protested. How could you say such a thing about the Torah? It's only like air to breathe. That implies that Torah only enables life. It's much more than that. It's much more basic than that. It's not like air to breathe. It's life itself. Kihem chayenu. How dare you say Torah is just like air to breathe? That was Rabbi Baruch Ber's devekus to Torah. Rabbi Baruch Ber lived from 1862 to 1939. He was so mizdabek to his Rebbe, Rabbi Baruch Ber. If anybody ever was zoicha to learn a piece of the Bercha Shmuel, the way he refers to Rashka Bahag, Adoinenu, Mareinu, Rabbeinu, Reb Chaim, his whole life and all of his Shiurim were rooted in the Torah of Reb Chaim Brisker. In fact, at the end of the life of Rabbi Baruch Ber, he was in Vilna. What was he doing in Vilna? Because the Nazis were coming, and the only protection for the Olam HaYeshivos was in Vilna, under the auspices, under the canopy of Reb Chaim Oizer. Reb Chaim Oizer asked Reb Baruch Ber to lead all the Bnei HaYeshivos in Vilna. Reb Baruch Ber was already in advanced age. He was already very weak. He was in his final illness. And in his final days, he kept on saying, V'shavti el beis avi, V'shavti el beis avi, V'shavti el beis avi. Nobody knew what it meant. Then Rabbi Baruch Ber asked to be dressed in his finest clothing because he felt the presence of his Rebbe, Reb Chaim. In his final moments, he felt he was returning to Reb Chaim. So he put on his finest. He straightened himself out like he was about to greet a very distinguished guest. And in his final moments, he was reunited with the Torah. He said, Ahava Rabbah. He said, V'shavti el beis avi. And he was reunited with Reb Chaim Brisker. He was born in Slutsk. You know that Rabbi Baruch Ber came to America. He came with his future son-in-law, Eruvin Grozovsky. He gave Shiurim in Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan. He gave Shiurim in New York and in many cities. When the mayor of New York City, Jimmy Walker, met Rabbi Baruch Ber, he was so taken, he gave him the keys to the city. So if you wanted to know who has the keys to the city of New York, Rabbi Baruch Ber. Not only that, Jimmy Walker, when he saw Rabbi Baruch Ber, said, you, sir, disprove evolution. If there could be a human being of such grace, of such dignity, of such sanctity, then you're clearly the Yitzir Kap of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, nobody understood what it meant that Rabbi Baruch Ber said, V'shavti el beis avi, but they realized what he wanted to be buried next to his father. But this cemetery, hard to imagine, had not even 1 inch of empty space in it. So how are they going to bury him next to his father? But his father was buried, so to speak, at the end of a row. And in the aisle, there was some extra space. And the Gedolim said, even though you don't usually bury in the aisle, but since this was the request of Baruch Ber, they buried him in the 1 millimeter of empty space here in this entire cemetery. You look at it now, you can't even imagine such a thing. About 13 years ago, a little girl in New York from a family of very prestigious Rosh Yeshiva. During recess, they were playing with Gedolim pictures, and she saw the picture of Rabbi Baruch Ber, and she disparaged his Tzura Kedosha. She immediately had a seizure, and she contracted a terrible illness, and she became disfigured, and nobody could explain it. It was inexplicable. So the family being related to Great Rosh Yeshiva asked, well, what were the conditions that this happened? And they found out that she criticized the appearance of Rabbi Baruch Ber. And they asked the Shaila, what do we need to do? They were told, you need to ask Rabbi Baruch Ber for Mechila. Mechila, we don't know where Rabbi Baruch Ber was buried, because after the Holocaust, after he was buried here, the cemetery was destroyed and nobody had known about his whereabouts for many, many, many decades. So how are they going to ask him for Mechila? They got a hold of the aerial map of this cemetery. They located the kever of Rabbi Baruch Ber's father, and from there they were able to trace exactly where Rabbi Baruch Ber was buried. And that's why today, here is Brod Hamatzeva Hu Kama B'Yom Dalid B'Kislev Tavshin Ayin Hey, about 11 years ago, and Rabbi Baruch Ber was nifter on a Friday, Hey B'Kislev. So it's interesting, the Matzeva was put up on Dalid Kislev. His yard site is Hey Kislev. He was the founder of the branch of Slobodka called Knesset Beis Yitzchak, and considered one of the fathers of the Olam HaYeshivas today. B'chusa Yogein Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael. Okay, friends, we're here in Shnipachek, which is the original site of the burial of the Vilna Gaon and the Ger Tzedek of Count Patatsky. Now, this is very important. This is the place where we're going to speak about one of the most central issues of this whole trip. Are you allowed to go to the kever of the Vilna Gaon? That's right. Are you permitted to go there? Do you know that the Vilna Gaon writes in his letter that he wrote to his family when he was headed to Eretz Yisrael? He tells his daughters and his wife, "V'tishmeri shaloi telchi lebeis hakvaros klal uklal." Be careful, never to go to the cemetery. Shesham mizdabkim haklipos moed. In the cemetery, the forces of evil cling there. V'kol shekain b'noshim, especially for women. Women are not allowed to go to cemeteries. V'chol hatzaros v'avonos ba'em mizeh. All tragedy and sin in this world comes from visiting the cemetery. The Vilna Gaon forbid his family, especially his wives and daughter, from visiting the cemetery. Not only did he forbid them, any tragedy you see in this world, the Gemara says, came from visiting the cemetery. So, by the way, if you think, okay, but at least I'm following the opinion of the Arizal. No, Reb Chaim Vital writes in the Sharuach HaKodesh, don't come close to Kfarim. So this is unanimously held, from the Gra to the Ari, not to visit a cemetery. In fact, in the official biography of the Gaon, of the Aliyos Eliyahu, he brings a story that the Gra once went with his brother Reb Dover to visit their mother on the yard site. Many people think on the yard site it's a good idea to go to the cemetery. So they left, and the Gra said to his brother, "You see, my dear brother, how happy Ma was that we visited him?" Reb Dover was very astounded that the Gra was able to see the presence of his mother at the kever. A few days later, the Gra told Reb Dover that he suffered from visiting the cemetery. He said, but Reb Dover said, didn't you say how happy the mother was that we visited her? Yes, says the Gra, but I suffered tremendously from going into the cemetery. So the question is, maybe if you want to visit other Gedolim, that might be a good idea. But the last individual that you would want to visit is the Vilna Gaon. After all, it's his opinion that you're not allowed to go. And there's a rule that we follow the halach of somebody, at least in their vicinity. So how could you visit the kever of the Vilna Gaon? And I was always thinking about that. One of the reasons that we haven't been to Vilna yet is, if you go to Vilna, you got to visit the Gaon. But how could you, in good faith, visit the kever of the Vilna Gaon? So Rav Moshe Sternbuch has a tshuva. Tshuvas v'hanhagos, Chelek Beis, Siman Samach Dalet. That first of all, the Gemara is only talking about Kivrei Chutz La'aretz. He's not talking about Kvarim in Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, there's no Tumah. The forces of evil don't apply to the Kvarim in Eretz Yisrael. And says Rav Sternbuch, the Gemara is not talking about Kivrei Tzadikim. Kivrei Tzadikim are not Metame. Therefore, Rav Sternbuch concludes that Kivrei Tzadikim in Chutz La'aretz have a status of Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, the minhag is that we do visit Kivrei Tzadikim, and we're mispalo there, and we're mishtateach there, especially if they're a relative or a parent. But if they're in Eretz Yisrael or Kivrei Tzadikim, the minhag is to visit. But still, how do you view visiting the kever of the Vilna Gaon? So I have to say, just shortly ago, I found the following. Okay, this is a gold mine. This is the official biography of the Chafetz Chaim, written by his son, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Pam kishachala. One time the Chafetz Chaim was ill. Bikesh leilech al kever hagra. He asked to go to the kever of the Vilna Gaon, the Vilna, ulavak shoy, and to ask him. Which is interesting expression, because the Mishnah Berurah says that at a kever we don't address the mess. We ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the schus of the mess. No, says Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. The Chafetz Chaim wanted to go to the kever of the Gaon to ask him la'oira rachamim alav. Why? Because the Chafetz Chaim wrote a peirush on the Torah's Kohanim, and there he farenfers all the questions the Achronim ask on the Gra. So in the merit of his defending the Gra, he wanted to be taken to the kever. So I think a good precedent to visit the kever of the Vilna Gaon is none other than the Chafetz Chaim himself, who was the one who wrote not to address the mess, but the Chafetz Chaim himself asked to be taken to the kever of the Vilna Gaon. But it's important to bear in mind what our attitude in general. It's we don't flock to the Beis Olam, but at least in Eretz Yisrael or Kivrei Tzadikim, we of course have precedent to visit Kivrei Tzadikim. Be'ez Hashem, when we go to the Gaon and to all the Tzadikim, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu answer our tefillos b'rachamim uv'ratzon. I think we could safely say, Manoira hamakom hazeh, we're at the kever of the Gaon of Vilna, Rabbi Eliyahu of Vilna. The Vilna Gaon lived a significant part of the 18th century, from 1720 to 1798. I think the most appropriate words to say are the words that his primary disciple, Reb Chaim Volozhiner, writes about the Gaon in his introduction to the Safra d'Tzniusa. Libi yega ema, my heart is gripped with fear, with terror. Midei dabri boy, speaking about the Gaon. Bahaloisi al zichroini, to remember this great man. Adam hagadol asher kamayu loinia mikama v'kama doyer shalfanav, an individual that there was no one like him even in many, many generations before him. Was there anyone who had such devekus to Torah? In the introduction of the Bir Hagra on Shulchan Aruch, his sons write that he didn't sleep more than 2 hours in any 24-hour period. He never slept more than 30 minutes at one time. He would sleep 3 30-minute segments in the nighttime, 1 30-minute segment in the daytime. Even during the day, he would learn in his house with the shutters closed. He would learn by candlelight. The Vilna Gaon is responsible for being menakeh, for cleaning the texts of the entire Shas, the Bavli, the Yushalmi, the Sifra, the Mechilta. The Gra had many prize students. In the Hakdam of the Bir Hagra, there's a listing of the Talmidim of the Vilna Gaon. Obviously, Reb Chaim Volozhiner was first. Reb Shloima, the Abbezin of Vilkamir. Reb Shloima Zalman, the brother of Chaim Volozhiner. Reb Sadia, who's the brother-in-law of Reb Shloima Zalman. Reb Shloima Mitalachin, the Maggid of Vilna. Reb Tzvi Hirsch Samidstitz. And Reb Shlomo Mimoilev. By the way, also to add Reb Yisrael Mishkalav. Just want to share what the Chazon Ish writes about our perspective, our attitude toward the Vilna Gaon. The Chazon Ish says, Anu misyachsim lehagra, like Shel Moshe Rabbeinu. We view the Gra, so to speak, in the same reverence as Moshe Rabbeinu, Ezra HaSofer, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rav Ashi, the Rambam, and the Vilna Gaon. Someone who is revealed to him his chelek in Torah, that it had not been revealed in many, many generations. V'hu nechshav ke'echad min harishonim. The Gra is considered one of the greatest Rishonim. In fact, we have a report that in the final days, the Radal writes, in the final days of the Vilna Gaon picked up his tzitzis and he cried. He said, in this world, for a few pennies, for a few cents, a person could be koina olam haba, and those opportunities are no longer available in the next world. Hagoyin mi Vilna, Rabbi Yo Kramer, me amudei olam, zechusa yagein aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, amen. Okay, next to the matzeva of the Goin, there's a big plaque here. What it had originally on the matzeva of the Goin, there's a line going through about vertically, about 75% of it, and on the left side, there's a matzeva for the Guraz Mechutin. His name was Reb Noach Mindis. He wrote Svarim Parparois Lechachma and Niflaois Chadashos. He did not put his name on the Svarim, but the Rashi Tevos of the Svarim are Noach, that was his name. Now, what year was Reb Noach Mindis Nifter? 1798, the same year as the Goin. What's interesting is that it says on the Matzeva of both Reb Noach Mindis and the Vilna Goin that they passed away in the year Ta'oimei Tzviya. Ta'oimei Tzviya. The numerical value of Ta'oimei Tzviya is 1798, that year. And that's what they were. They were beloved gazelles. They were beloved in life because they were mechutanim. The Gra's son, Rabbi Avram ben Agra, was married to Sarah, the daughter of Reb Noach Mindis, and Hashkacha has it, they're also buried together. So they were nifter in the year Ta'amei Tzviya, 1798, which is written both on the Gra's kever and the kever of Reb Noach Mindis. Okay, at the Oyhel of the Vilna Gaon, where the Gra was moved in 1950, they also moved the ashes of the Ger Tzedek of Vilna. The story of the Ger Tzedek of Vilna occupies many great lore in the Jewish people. He was killed on the second day of Shavuos. And on the second day of Shavuos, Rav Tzvi Hirsch Levinson, the son-in-law of the Chavetz Chaim, would always recount the story of the Ger Tzedek of Vilna. He was burned to death because he refused to renounce Judaism. You need to know that the death of the Ger Tzedek of Vilna has halachic implications until today. It changed halacha, and I'm going to talk about that. You know, there's an idea, V'zarach Hashemesh Uba Hashemesh, that the sun rises and the sun sets, that Hashem does not bring sunset until first the sun rises. There's an idea that when a tzaddik passes on, another tzaddik takes his place. Did you know on the day of the Petira of the Ger Tzedek, the day he was murdered, was the day of the birth of Reb Chaim Volozhiner. Reb Chaim Volozhiner was born on the day that the Ger Tzedek was killed. When the Ger Tzedek was burned to death, the town that supplied the wood for his death burnt down. When they burnt him in the town square, it caused such a sensation in heaven. The building opposite was stained black from smoke. Now, I think he was burned pretty close to our hotel. And they tried to repaint it. No, the black came through. They repainted it, the black came through until they had to destroy the building. For many years, we were not allowed to publish his story. The censors always censored out the story. It was handed down from father to son, from Rebbe to Talmud, with in a secret manuscript, until finally today it's recorded. So in 1660, there was a very powerful, wealthy individual. We call him Duke Patutsky, a very unusual man. He had unusual characteristics. He acquired 999 properties just so that people should talk about it. You know, if he would have had 1,000, who would talk about it? But his name, Patutsky, was the name of royalty in this area. He had a son, Valentine. Valentine was destined for greatness, so he groomed him to become a bishop. He sent him off to a special school with a friend, Zaramba, and he was showing so much promise, they sent him to France. And as this Valentine is studying the Old Testament, the New Testament, it doesn't jibe. There's something missing over here. And he explored Judaism. And he ran off to Amsterdam, where he converted to Judaism. His parents got word that their son not only abandoned the faith, but also converted to Judaism, and they're searching for him. He knew he couldn't be safe in Amsterdam, so he thinks, where's the furthest place on the end of the earth he could go? Vilna. And he adopts the dress and the look of the Prushim, so he grew a long beard. Payas, he would never be found, but the Vilna Gaon told him, Vilna's a big city, is a cosmopolitan city. They're going to discover you here. You need to go to Ilya. So he goes to Ilya. In Ilya, there was a tailor who made uniforms for high-ranking Polish officials. And he's always hearing the Polish talk about the child, Valentine, of the son of the Duke Patutsky. And he's looking at this guy with a long beard and payas, and when he speaks Polish, it's with a strange accent, and there's something unusual about this person. He suspected that this person was none other than Valentine, the son of Count Patutsky. Meanwhile, he's always learning in the Beis Medrash. This Avram ben Avram, he adopts the name Avram ben Avram, the Ger Tzedek. He's learning in the Beis Medrash, and the son of this Polish tailor is always disturbing in the Beis Medrash. Until finally Avram ben Avram says, enough already, stop disturbing. And this really got the Polish tailor very upset. And he went to the Bishop of Vilna, and the identity of Avram ben Avram was discovered. And the parents were summoned, and the mother says, my dear child, you need to renounce your Judaism publicly, but you could still observe privately. We'll make you a castle, you'll observe privately, otherwise they're going to take your life. And our tradition is, based on Rav Ben Sion Alphys, the Maggid of Vilna, that he told his mother, I love you dearly, but I love the truth even more. He was sentenced to be burnt at the stake. His mother runs off to the officials to get a pardon. She gets a pardon, but by the time she got the pardon and returned, his life had already been taken. Now, there's an amazing tradition that we have that his executioners beg him. They say, we know you're going to go up to the world of truth, and then you're going to want to take revenge against us, and you're going to make our lives miserable. Please forgive us. And he says, that's a ridiculous question. He says, Lama hadavar doima, you know what it's analogous to? It's analogous to a little boy playing in the sand, and he's making a sandcastle, and he's the prince, and his friends, kick the sandcastle, and the prince says, one day I'm going to take revenge against you. One day I'm going to get back at you. And one day this prince became the king, and his friends were very frightened. And when he became the king, he turns to them, he says, you have nothing to be scared of. You see, now that I'm the king, I realize and I see that sandcastles are meaningless. So too Avram ben Avram said, once I go up to the world of truth, and I see my chelek in olam haba, and I see all the reward I'm going to have, what you did to me in this transient, insignificant world won't mean anything to me. You don't have to ask mechila. We have a tradition that the Vilna Gaon, by the way, how old was the Vilna Gaon the year Avram ben Avram was killed? The Vilna Gaon was 29 years old. And the Vilna Gaon sees Avram ben Avram, he's desponding. He says, why are you despondent? You're about to be Mekayim in the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. And Avram ben Avram said, I'm despondent because I have no parents and I have no descendants. Whereupon the Vilna Gaon says, do not be despondent. Kay amar Hashem, ani rishain v'ani achrain. God says, I'm your parent and I'm your descendant. I heard this many times, that I was thinking on the bus, what does the Vilna Gaon mean that Hashem is your descendant. How is Hashem your descendant? You know, it's nice, poetic words, but what does it mean? How is that nechama? So I was thinking, based on a teaching of the student of the Vilna Gaon, Reb Chaim Belazhner. You know, Reb Chaim Belazhner says, Tenu oizei like him. We influence Hashem. You know, we think Hashem runs the world. That's what we learn in yeshiva. Hashem runs the world. Our Chaim HaKadosh says, Koi Amar Bayracha Yaakov. The Jewish people run the world. The Nefesh HaChaim writes, Tenu oizei like him. Through our maisim, we control how Hashem operates in this world. Maybe what the Vilna Gaon was telling Avram and Avram, Hashem is your descendant. Through your act of Kiddush Hashem, you change the way Hashem deals with this world. You, so to speak, empower Hashem to be native to Klal Yisrael. So in a sense, all of the chesed Hashem does to the world is through your actions. Hashem is your descendant. When they took the Ger Tzedek through the streets of Vilna to his execution, all the Jews closed the doors, they closed the shutters. They were afraid maybe they would be carried away. There was only one brave individual who went out to hear the bracha of the Ger Tzedek. By the way, we have a tradition of the song the Ger Tzedek sang when he was being taken out to be killed. Avol anachnu b'nei brisecha. We have a tradition of the song that he sang. It's available. You can listen to it. The author of Yesod v'Shorish HaAvodah went to hear what Avram ben Avram would say. He said, Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysav, v'tzivanu lekadesh es Hashem. And he answered Amen to the bracha. For years, no monument could be built on the ashes of the Ger Tzedek. The ashes were right next to the Vilna Gaon. And a strange tree grew out of place over the ashes of Avram ben Avram. There are many legends about those who tried to chop it down. In 1919, they put a kever, they put a matzeva over the ashes. And when the old cemetery in Vilna was destroyed and they built the new one, they took the ashes and they buried them right next to the Vilna Gaon. You know, I think it's very significant that the Patira of Avram ben Avram was on the second day of Shavuos. We know the second day of Shavuos is the day the Torah was given. It wasn't given on the first day of Shavuos. It was given on the second day. The Chafetz Chaim would say over Torah from Avram ben Avram. What would the Chafetz Chaim say? The Chafetz Chaim would say, why do we sometimes have Gerim in Klal Yisrael, and sometimes we have people who abandon Judaism? Chafetz Chaim says that when Hashem gave the Torah to the Jewish people, of course on the second day of Shavuos, and the Jewish people said Na'aseh v'nishma, and the nations of the world rejected it, that was al pi roiv, most of them. That was most Jews accepted it. Some did not, and those are the ones who abandoned. But some Gentiles did accept it, and those are the ones who became the Gerei Tzedek. So Avram ben Avram is the paragon of all the Gerei Tzedek. His Petira was on the second day of Shavuos, the day Hashem gave the Torah not only to Klal Yisrael, but also to the Ummos Ha'olam who embrace the truth of the Torah. One last thing. I mentioned the death of Avram ben Avram has halachic implications. Everybody knows the first page of Mishnah Berurah says, based on the Zayar, that when you wake up in the morning, you should wash Negel Wasser right by your bed, within Dalet Amos. And it's interesting, you know, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't bring it down. And the Beis Yosef says, well, maybe because it's such an important halacha and the penalty is so severe, the Shulchan Aruch didn't want everyone to know about it, and maybe people would not observe it. But we know that it's not as widely observed as other halachas. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, in the name of Reb Chaim Belazhner, that on the day they killed Avram ben Avram, it had such an impact on the world. The Koyach HaTumah was so minimized. Like we said, the Gemara told Avram ben Avram, God will be your descendant. How was the Koyach HaTumah minimized? It mitigated the importance of washing Negel Wasser in your Dalet Amos. And that's one of the reasons we're lenient. Many people are lenient not to do it. It has to do with when Avram ben Avram was killed at the stake, when he was burnt, it mitigated the Koyach HaTumah, the Sitra Achra. Now, It doesn't have to be mitoch daled amos. Not that this is halacha, but Rav Shlomo Zalman said this as a basis for lenient practice. Zechusai Yagein Aleinu, and on all of Klal Yisrael, and on all the Gerei Emes and Betzedek that have joined our people. Okay. It's a great zechus to be here in the Vilna Cemetery at the kever of one of the great Gaonim of the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, Rav Itzela Panovitcher. Rav Itzela Panovitcher, not to be confused with Rav Itzela Volozhiner, who is the son of Reb Chaim Volozhiner, or Reb Itzela Petterberg. This is Reb Yitzchak Yaakov Rabinowitz, Reb Itzela Panovitcher. He was born in Grodno in 1854, and he lived 65 years. He passed away in Tafresh Ayin Ches. When he was young, his mother passed away. He became a student of Rabbi Yehuda Leib Perlman, the Minsker Gadol. He was engaged at 14 years old. Rabbi Itzela's father asked him to go to Brisk to look after some of the real estate the family owned. There, as a young man, he became acquainted with the Beis Halevi, and the Beis Halevi was amazed by the scholarship of Rabbi Itzela. And when the Beis Halevi, son of Reb Chaim, came back to Brisk from Volozhin, the Beis Halevi wanted Reb Chaim to learn with Rabbi Itzela Panovitcher. They were known as the two greatest lamdanim in all of Lita. And in 1889, when the Alter of Slabodka was looking for Rosh Yeshiva of Slabodka, the Beis Halevi proposed that the Alter of Slabodka hire Reb Itzela Panovitcher to be the Rosh Yeshiva of Slabodka, which he served in that capacity for 5 years. He was only 35 years at the time. One of his greatest Talmidim was Hagoyin Rav Naftali Trapp. We're going to be going to his kever in Radin. He was a Rosh Yeshiva in Radin. In 1894, Reb Itzela left Slabodka. He became a Rav in Garzde, which is a Lithuanian town on the border with Germany. He opened up his own yeshiva, and the Alter sent some of his best Talmidim to help Reb Itzela in his new yeshiva, which was a characteristic of the Alter to give up from his own yeshiva to help Harbatzas Torah in general. Some of those Talmidim were Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer, Rav Moshe Mordechai Epstein. Now, the yeshiva in Garzhed did not last long. Eventually, the Talmidim went back to the main yeshiva in Slabodka, and then in 1896, after the yeshiva was only open for 2 years, Rav Itzela became the Rav in Panovich. And in 1903, Rav Itzela Panovitcher was invited to become the Rosh Yeshiva in Telz when Rav Shimon Shkop left Telz, and he almost was going to, and he decided not to. Rav Lezer Gordon was going to step down and give the Rosh Yeshiva Shaf to Rav Itzela Panovitcher, but Rav Itzela Panovitcher said to his communion Panovitch he's not going to leave them, and Rav Lezer Gordon even wanted to take him to a din Torah. He asked his Talmud, the Panovitcher Rav, to represent him, and the Panovitcher Rav said, do you think you're going to win this case? A worker is allowed to back out as long as he didn't start working yet. So Rav Lezer Gordon said, what do you mean? But he made a kinyan, so he can't back out. And Rav Kahneman says, okay, but he could still send a replacement. And Rav Lezer Gordon said, no, but he's irreplaceable. In any event, while Rav Itzela was in Panovich, it became a great Makam Torah. In 1907, the daughter of the owner of the company Wysatsky Tea, the daughter of Kalman Zev Wysatsky, Liba Miriam Gavransky, decided she's going to support a group of loimdim in a city, and the city of Panovich was chosen. So it became a great Makam Torah. Rav Itzela continued to lead Panovich until World War I broke out. He had to flee Panovich during the war. After the war, he came back to Panovich, and he passed away on Chaf Adar, as it says here on the kever, Tafresh Ayin Ches. He was not allowed to rebuild the yeshiva. Now, he was originally buried in Panovich, and his remains were brought to the cemetery here in Vilna in the year Taf Shin Chaf Tes 1969. Zechusa Yagein Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael. Amen. Okay, it's a great zechus to be here at the kever of one of the pillars of Klal Yisrael in the beginning of the 20th century. Reb Chaim Oizer Grzinski, Maran Reb Chaim Oizer, Ben Aravagun, Reb David Shloimeh, the Av Bezdin of Vilna, who passed away on Hey Menachem Av. Hey Menachem Av, he lived from 1863 to 1940. Just to get a perspective of when Reb Chaim Oizer passed away. Reb Chaim Oizer passed away as World War II was breaking out and the storms of the Nazi aggression began. You know, we mentioned that Reb Baruch Ber passed away on Hey Kislev in 1939. Earlier before that was the passing of Reb Shimon Shkop. So the three leaders of Klal Yisrael in Europe all passed away as World War II was beginning. And you can imagine how that shook the Jewish people to the core. When the leaders of Klal Yisrael pass away, we lose our protection. And Reb Chaim Oizer was literally the father of Klal Yisrael. Reb Chaim Oizer had somewhat of a tragic life because Reb Chaim Oizer had one daughter, Malka. Malka is buried right here. Bitoi Habasula Malka, who at 17 years old became ill, and he cared for her, he tended to her, and Nebuch, she passed away at 20 years old, so he had no living progeny. And even though he knew that his daughter was passing away, but he had to answer so many shailas, what's he going to do during the Shiva? How's he going to respond? Reb Chaim Oizer, in the days before Malka passed away, wrote 80 tshuvos. He wrote 80 tshuvos so that he would not leave his children, his flock, without answers to their shailas. You know, the Reb Chaim Oizer wrote Achiezer, some of the Chidushim in Achiezer, at 17 years old. But he once told the Chavetz Chaim's son-in-law that when he was young, he thought it was a great accomplishment to write Chidushei Torah. When he got older, he sees it's a great accomplishment to gladden the heart of an almana. Reb Chaim Oizer, Reb Michtam Elio says, was the paragon of Midos Tovos. He had a very congenial personality. He was very welcoming. He was literally Avihem Shal Yisrael. It's interesting, as a young boy, he attended a shiur from Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said a chidush. He asked the kasha. He gave an answer from the Yushalmi. And as a young boy, Reb Chaim Oizer went to Rabbi Yisrael Salanter and he refuted the shiur based on the rush in Shavuos. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter kissed him on the forehead. He said, you should get a good shidduch. And indeed, Reb Chaim Oizer got a good shidduch. He married the granddaughter of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, Alta Leah. So Rabbi Yisrael is married to the daughter of the Rav of Vilna, who is the son-in-law of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. He passed away, and at 22 years old, Reb Chaim Oizer became the Rav in Vilna, and they told him, you know, you're too young. He said, don't worry, it's a mum oiver. It's an imperfection that as time passes, it will get better, it will improve. Reb Chaim Oizer, when the war broke out, you had thousands and thousands of Bnei Yeshiva who came to Vilna. Vilna was the only protected city. Reb Chaim Oizer cared for them. He took care of them. He started the organization Knesset Yisrael, which later developed into being Agudas Yisrael. Together, him and the Ger Rebbe, who was also in Vilna, they were the creators of Agudas Yisrael, which of course is an institution that is at the heart of the Jewish people until today. Zechusa Yogin Aleinu v'al Kol Yisrael. Amen. Okay, friends, there are a few names that it's worthwhile to mention while we're still here in Vilna. We're driving back from the cemetery. As you saw, many of the great tzaddikim, unfortunately, the cemeteries were desecrated and they had to be moved. So they were able to preserve the Vilna Gaon, Avram ben Avram, Reb Chaim Oizer, other Kvarim. But there's a name that it's important to be familiar with. Everybody knows the Ktsois HaChoshen, the Nesivos HaMishpad, Rabbi Kiva Eger, the Chassam Sofer. There's a name that is equally as great, but is virtually unknown. The Rav of Vilna from 1762 to 1836, Rabbi Avram Aveli Fasvaler. Rabbi Avram Fasvaler. Rabbi Aveli Fasvaler. You familiar with that name? You ever hear the name? Rabbi Aveli Fasvaler? Well, you need to be familiar with this name. 4 years after the Goin passed away, Rabbi Aveli Fasvaler was appointed the Rosh Av Bezdin of Vilna. And there were some pretty qualified contenders. Reb Chaim Volozhiner, the Chayei Adam. No. Reb Aveli Fasvaler was unanimously appointed to be the Rosh HaBezdin. He was already determined to be the Gadol Hadar. Can you imagine? The greatest sage of the generation today is not so well known. He was a great Anav. The story goes, there was a Jew from Vilna who lost his job. He would learn in the Beis Medrash, and he would come and talk and learning with Rabbi Aveli Fasvaler, mostly about nonsense. Nothing, he didn't have much to contribute. And he would constantly ask Rabbi Aveli Fasvaler questions. The reason being, he wanted to, so to speak, maintain a reputation that he was holding and learning. So he wanted everybody to see that he was speaking and learning with Rabbi Aveli Fasvaler. In fact, one time he told Rabbi Aveli Fasvaler, Rav, you yourself don't even understand the sugya. And everybody wanted to silence him. And Rabbi Aveli Fasvaler says, let it be. The man, he has no job, he has no success in life. His only kick in life is that people should think he's strong in learning, that he could disprove the Rav. So let him say this. There is a very important chidush that is brought in the Chayei Adam from Rabbi Aveli Fasvaler. Anybody know this chidush? The Chayei Adam brings in Klal Chav Dalet Halacha Yud that if the first night of Rosh Hashanah you forget to say HaMelech HaKadosh, everybody knows during the Asar Simei Tshuva. If you don't say HaMelech HaKadosh, you have to repeat the Shemona Esrei. If the first night of Rosh Hashanah you forget HaMelech HaKadosh, you do not repeat the Shemona Esrei. Just like if you forget Ya'alav Yavai in the night of Rosh Chodesh, you don't repeat the Shemona Esrei. So too, if you forget HaMelech HaKadosh, the first night of Rosh Hashanah, you do not repeat Shemona Esrei. So the Beis Halevi in his Tshuvas asks, well, how could you say you don't have to repeat the Shemona Esrei? This Shemona Esrei would be a Tarti Desasri. He davened a Rosh Hashanah Dika davening. He davened a Yom Tov Dika davening. Then he has to say HaMelech HaKadosh. You see, by Rosh Chodesh, in what way is it Rosh Chodesh? There's no Isser Malacha. So there's no Isser Malacha. It's only Rosh Chodesh if you say Ya'alav Yavai. So if you don't say Ya'alav Yavai, so it's not Rosh Chodesh yet. So we know the reason why you don't have to say Ya'alav Yavai, it's not Ma'akev, is because Bezdin did not sanctify the beginning of the month until the Yom. So the only aspect of Rosh Chodesh is saying Ya'alav Yavai. So if you don't say Ya'alav Yavai, you don't have to repeat the Shemona Esrei. But the Beis Halevi asks, but you're saying a Rosh Hashanah Dika davening. If you're saying a Rosh Hashanah Dika davening, you're declaring it's Rosh Hashanah. It's Asar Simei Tshuva. Then you have to say HaMelech HaKadosh. How could you grab the rope on both ends? In fact, the Mishnah Brura in the Sharat Tzion agrees with the Beis Halevi that if you don't say HaMelech HaKadosh, you have to repeat the Shemona Esrei. Furthermore, what would the connection be? What would the analogy be to Rosh Chodesh? Rosh Chodesh, the Bezdin does not declare it Rosh Chodesh until the morning. But it's Rosh Hashanah already at night. You're now to do Malacha at night. So if it's Rosh Hashanah at night, then you have to say HaMelech HaKadosh. So you would say it's case closed. The Mishnah Brura concludes that you have to say HaMelech HaKadosh the first night of Rosh Hashanah. Not so fast. Comes Shilas Tshuvas Binyan Shleimai of Reb Shlomo HaKohen of Vilna. Reb Edward, Reb Shlomo HaKohen of Vilna. Comes Reb Moshe Feinstein and the Igrois Moshe. And Reb Moshe says the halacha is like Reb Aveli Fasvaler, that if you don't say HaMelech HaKadosh the night of Rosh Hashanah, you do not repeat the Shemona Esrei. What's the logic, says Reb Shlomo HaKohen of Vilna, says Reb Moshe Feinstein. Why do we say HaMelech HaKadosh? Because during the Asar Yemei Tshuva, God sits in judgment. When does God sit in judgment? We know Malchusa Deshmaya Ke'ein Malchusa Da'ara. The heavenly sovereignty, the heavenly court, is akin to the court down here in this world. Bezdin only convenes during the day. Likewise, in the Bezdin Shamayla, the judgment, Hashem is only Yoshev al Kisei HaMishpat in the Yom. So even though it is the Yom Tif of Rosh Hashanah, says Rav Moshe, HaMelech HaKadosh is not contingent on Yom Tif, It's contingent on the din, and the din doesn't begin till the day. So says Rav Moshe, would not be a tarti desasri to say Rosh Hashanah dika davening and still omit HaMelech HaKadosh. Therefore, of course, l'chadchila we should say HaMelech HaKadosh, but if one did not say HaMelech HaKadosh, Rav Moshe rules in favor of Rabbi Aveli Fasvaler quoted in the Chaya Adam against the Mishnah Brura that one would not repeat the Shemona Esrei. How do we paskin? We paskin, you better not forget to say HaMelech HaKadosh, otherwise you did not start off the year on a good footing. Can you imagine? The guy in his first Shemona Esrei of the year already blew it. So in deference to Rabbi Aveli Fasvaler and our trip to Vilna, from now on, I want to make sure everybody remembers to say HaMelech HaKadosh the first night of Rosh Hashanah. And what about the second night of Rosh Hashanah? Hashem's already Yoshev al Kisei HaMishpat. Would Rabbi Aveli Fasvaler say his Chiddush even on the second night of Rosh Hashanah? Says Rav Moshe, yes! Why? But Hashem is already Yoshev al Kisei Adin. It would be a bizayon to Yom Tov Sheni of Galios if we would be more machmir on the second day of Yom Tov than the first day, says Rav Moshe, on the second night, possibly. Also, if you forget HaMelech HaKadosh, you would not have to repeat the Shemona Esrei. So the second night, you really better not forget to say HaMelech HaKadosh. This is one of the great chidushim of one of the greatest Rabbanim who ever lived in Vilna, Rabbi Aveli Fasvaler. Okay. Okay, everyone, one last personality that we're going to speak about. The Chayei Adam, Rabbi Avram Danzig, who lived from 1748 to 1821. Rabbi Avram Danzig was also a mechutan of the Vilna Gaon. So the Vilna Gaon had a mechutan, Rav Noach Mindis, who was buried right next to him. Who remembers what year the Gaon passed away?
1797.
Very good, 1798. What year was that? Ta'oimei Tzviya, Ta'oimei Tzviya. The year is 1798. He also had a mechutan, the Chayei Adam, Rabbi Avram Danzig, who wrote the Sefer Chayei Adam. Now the Chayei Adam was a businessman, he was a merchant. He writes in the intro to Chayei Adam, Hine yadati ki yislachashu alai, v'yoimru hagam Shaul ben Neviim. I know people are murmuring about me. Is Shaul also a Navi? Meaning, is this a working businessman writing a Sefer? We know you that you're a merchant in Frankfurt and Leipzig for 15 years. When exactly did you learn? Doesn't the Torah say, Loi me'ever layom hi? You can't be a Talmud Chacham and be a merchant? The Chayei Adam says. He says, my dear brother, you should know that when I went to work, it was not to amass wealth. Everyone could testify. I traveled far, but even as I was traveling, I was learning. Even when I was sitting in the store, I was learning. Even when I engaged in business, my mind was always occupied in learning. The Sefer Chayei Adam came out in 1810 anonymously, and he wrote there in his original Hakdama. The reason why he wrote anonymously is not out of humility, but the Sefer Hasidim says that it may diminish from one's reward. And he says, don't wonder that this Sefer came from such a small individual. Kimin hatoilas hakatan yoitze bigdei hameshi. From a worm comes silk. From the worm chilazain comes techeles. Now the Chayei Adam says something very interesting. That he says his primary kavan in writing Chachmas Adam was for balabatim, for people who don't have time for in-depth study. But many Rabbanim told him that actually it's very helpful to be able to review the Shulchan Aruch, and they're able to mekayim ligmar v'hadar lizbar. First you learn, and then you explain. We'll end with a story. Hopefully you'll be able to sleep tonight, but my job is just to tell you, give it to you straight. The Chayei Adam writes, after he talks about the importance of saying brachos bekavana and not being moitzi shem shamayim levatala, he tells the story of a certain gadol who was called up to the Bezin Shamala, and everybody said, clear way for, Rashka Bahag. And they gave him a nice welcome, and they said, Rabbi, were you Mekayim this mitzvah? Yeah. Were you Mekayim Perya Verivya? Yeah. Did you do it with the right kavanos? Yeah. Who says? So they brought in all the malachim that were created from his mitzvah, and they were strong malachim, they were good malachim, and he passed that test. Then they asked him, Rabbi, were you careful from being moitzi shem shamayim levatala? And the rabbi was silent. And they said, why are you silent? He didn't answer. And they asked to bring in all the angels that were created based on the brachos that he said. And these angels were weak angels, maimed angels, injured angels, angels that had all kinds of disabilities. And the whole Bezdin Shalmala tore kriya, and they gave the rabbi a choice. Either you could go to the purgatory, or you could come back to this world as a Gilgal. But you did not say brachos with the right kavanah when you said Hashem's name, and therefore your choice is either you could go to Gehenna, or you could come back to this world. And the rabbi chose to go to Gehenna. Therefore the Chai Adam encourages a person to try to say brachos with the right kavanah, so that they will not be faced with that unpleasant choice of having to come either back to this world or to go to Gehenna. On that note, I wish everyone a Erev Shabbos Kodesh L'Tova. We know that all the preparations for Shabbos are preparing for the Yom Shekulei Shabbos Menucha L'Chaya Olamim. The Mishnah Berurah brings down that when we eat meat on Shabbos, it's in commemoration of the Shar Habar that we're going to eat in Olam Haba. And when we eat fish on Shabbos, it's a commemoration of the Levyasan. And what kavanah should you have when you take a hot shower before Shabbos? The kavanah should be, says the Mishnah Berurah, that the hot shower is zecher to Nahar Dinar, Gehenom, that you traverse before Gan Eden. So my humble blessing to everyone is to say brachas with kavanah, and the closest you have to come to Gehenna is the hot shower that you take on Erev Shabbos Kodesh. Shkaya. What amazing zechus, here we are. It's the 14th of Iyar, Pesach Sheni, and we traveled all the way from Vilna to Kovna. I'm here with my good Yedid, Rabbi Harakiah. We're at the Kever Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector, the Kovna Rav. 1817 to 1896, Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan held many rabbinic posts until 1864, when he was appointed the Rav of Kovna, which he held this post until his Patira. He wrote Shaus Tshuvas Be'er Yitzchak, Ein Yitzchak, Nachal Yitzchak. Buried right next to him, Benoi, Harav Tzvi Hirsch Rabinowitz, Tzion Hagoin Hagadol, Rashke Behag, Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan Spector. Amazingly, he wrote 158 shuvos. To mater agunos, there are only 3 instances of agunos he did not have the capacity to mater. Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan was very in touch with all the developments in the Holy Land in Eretz Yisrael, and he assisted Rav Shmuel Salant in the distribution of the tzedakah of Rabbi Meir Bal Hanes, and therefore how appropriate it is we made the trip after Chatzos Halayla. It's about 1:45 a.m. on our final night of the trip to visit his kever on Pesach Sheni, to have one last chance, that all our tefillos should be neskabel, barachamim v'ratzayin, zechusa, yagein aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Amen. It's a great zchus to be here in Kovna at the kever of Rav Baruch Horowitz, who lived from 1870 to 1936, one of the Talmidim of Hakim of Rav Itzela Panovitcher, and of the Chavetz Chaim. He is counted among the Talmidei Radin, and among the first of the Chavrei Koilel Kodshim that was established by the Chavetz Chaim. Chavetz Chaim in Sefer Tzipis Yeshua speaks at length in the 3rd chapter of the importance of establishing Koilelim for Kodshim. He was counted among the first of this Chavrei Koilel. He was well known among the Olam HaYeshivas in Europe with his lamdos and his incredible personality, and he was very esteemed by the Chavetz Chaim, and the Chavetz Chaim even appointed him to say Shiurim in his yeshiva. He was a baki b'chol chadrei Torah, and he was a Rav of Alksut in the place of Ramtali, Amsterdam, from the year 1800 until his Patira. He was also a Rosh Hashiva in Slabodka for 20 years. During the First World War, the yeshivas from Lita were moved to Russia, but he remained in Lita, and he was concerned to open up Slabodka right after the German conquest, and with much effort, he was matzliach in gathering Bachrim and re-establishing the yeshiva. He was one of the founders of Agudas HaRabbanim of Lita. He was the Yoshev Rosh of the Agudas HaRabbanim. He was from the Rosh Medabrim of Yahadus Charedus, and in 1929 he went to America on behalf of Yeshiva Slabodka, and he was received very warmly. Aside from his many mamarim that appeared in journals, for example, the Yagdol Torah, he left over a great treasure trove of manuscripts, and they were hidden in the Kovna ghetto, and they were lost there. He was a brother-in-law of Rav Machon Maggid Harakiah and Rabbi Zalman Meltzer. Zechusay Yagein Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael. Okay, it's an amazing zchus to be here in Kovna, at the kever of the Kovna Rav, Marenu Rabbeinu, Rabbi Avram, Doiv Ber Kahana Shapira, the Kovna Rav, who was killed in the ghetto, the Kovna ghetto, on Chaf Beis Adar Aleph in Tafshin Gimel in 1943. The Kovna Rav gave an amazing drasha. He said that those who are involved in building a Beis HaKnesses are guaranteed Tchias HaMesim. Why? Because L'Asad Lavai, the shul is going to be relocated to Eretz Yisrael. It's going to be moved to Eretz Yisrael. Once it's moved to Eretz Yisrael, it has a panam chadashos. How could it be that those who built the shul will not be zeicha to be there by its relocation and re-establishment? So therefore, investing in the building of a shul, says the Kovna Rav, is an eternal investment because it guarantees the resurrection of those who participate in its construction. Rabbi Avram Doiv Ber Kahana Shapiro, Zechusay Yagein Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael. Amen. On our last stop at our trip, we're here on the streets of Slabodka, at the home of Rabbi Avram Grzinski, Paniro 9, or it's a corner house, Karnevis 12, the home of the Mashgiach of Slabodka, Rabbi Avram Grzinski. When the Chafetz Chaim met Rabbi Avram Grzinski, he saw in him the full nobility of the efforts of the Alter to build Talmidim. Rabbi Avram Grzinski was killed in the Nazi occupation here in Slabodka, Kovna. In the final days, Rabbi Avram Grzinski felt that if he would gather together 10 tzaddikim, perhaps that would be able to protect them from the persecution of the Nazis. And as printed in the Hakdama of the Dvar Avram, Rabbi Avram Grzinski gathered 10 tzaddikim. I was told by one of my rabbeim, one of these 10 tzaddikim was Rav Mordechai Zuckerman, who wrote the psicha of the Taras Avram of Rav Avram Grzinski. And there he wrote 12 things that the Talmidim should work on to protect themselves, to work on Emunah, Taras HaMishpacha, Chinuch Habanim, Avas Yisrael, Avas Eretz Yisrael. From this home, Rabbi Elchanan Wasserman was hiding until he was taken by the Nazis to be killed. This home was owned also by Rabbi Aryeh Malkiel Friedman, the father of the wife of Rav Schneur Cutler. This is a historic home, a home from which Torah continues to emanate from Klal Yisrael, the traditions of Slabodka, the traditions of the Alter, the traditions of Rabbi Avram Grzinski, the home where Rabbi Elchanan was taken from. And the Chassam Sofer teaches us, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Bardishev teaches us that just like the Batei Knesias will be replanted in Eretz Yisrael, so too will the Oyalei Tzadikim be replanted in Eretz Yisrael. That's what we say in the Haggadah, Hashata Hacha, Lashana Haba, Ba'ara di Yisrael. We could be sure that this is one of the great homes in Klal Yisrael that ultimately will one day be replanted in Eretz Yisrael. May we be Zoichet to the Gula Shlema B'Karev Mamish. Okay. Okay, our closing presentation here in Vilna. We're leaving the city of Vilna. And of course, we know there was a point in time where the Vilna Gaon also set out and embarked to leave Vilna to go to Eretz Yisrael sometime after his father passed away, when one of his daughters were already married and he still had small children in the house. He set off to go to Eretz Yisrael, but we know ultimately he didn't make it. Why not? So if you look in the introduction of the Bir Hagra, his son's right that the Gra said that Shamayim did not allow him to. Shamayim did not allow him to. That's one reason. However, there are many other reasons and ideas that are proposed for why the Vilna Gaon ultimately did not go to Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Eliyahu, the Abbezin of Kalish, says he is sure that the Vilna Gaon was a spark of Moshe Rabbeinu. And just like Moshe Rabbeinu was not allowed entry into Eretz Yisrael, likewise the Vilna Gaon. Now this is in line with what we mentioned from the Chazon Ish, that the Chazon Ish said that our attitude toward the Gaon is like Moshe Rabbeinu, like Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, like Ravina Ravashi. But he mentions Moshe Rabbeinu, and indeed, very much like Moshe Rabbeinu, just like Moshe Rabbeinu was not able to go into Eretz Yisrael, the Gaon cannot make it into Eretz Yisrael. Others say that the Gaon, like Rabbi Yehuda Beirav, the Rebbe of Beis Yosef, wanted to reinstate Smicha, and when the Gaon realized he would not be able to reinstate Smicha, he decided not to return to Eretz Yisrael. Others suggest that the Gaon was afraid that the ship that he would travel on would have wormy bread, and if he would have wormy bread, he would not be able to have 3 sudos on Shabbos, and therefore it was worthwhile for him not to go to Eretz Yisrael, so as not to give up having 3 sudos on Shabbos. Others suggest that the first Rosh Hashanah that the Gaon would make it to Eretz Yisrael, Rosh Hashanah came out on Shabbos. The Vilna Gaon held that if Rosh Hashanah comes out on Shabbos in Yerushalayim, you have to blow shofar, and he was concerned that others would not agree, and therefore the Gaon did not go. Still others suggest that the Gaon wanted to be machmer, to be mafresh maser on land owned by Akum, but since the Beis Yosef disagreed with that, in deference to the Beis Yosef, the Gaon did not want to be put in that position. And so others say that the Gaon heard reports that the Ashkenazim were being persecuted in Yerushalayim. So these are 7 possible reasons why the Gaon did not make it into Eretz Yisrael. Ultimately, min hashamayim, the Gaon was not given rishus to go. So we're now leaving the city of Vilna. We were zoicha to be mishtateach on the kever of the Gaon, and visit many other Gedolei Yisrael who are buried here. Zuchusam Yagein Oli.